Hello, everyone, and welcome to TeamA presentation. Tonight, TeamA is going to discuss MySpace failure. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over the agenda tonight. Matthew, Megan, and myself. So we're going to start with the MySpace lifecycle. Then what went wrong and the leadership role. Third, we're going to go where were they lacking in leadership, the stakeholder buy-in, and fail to change adapt, internal and external factors, and the change process, and finally, lessons learned and conclusion. Next slide, please. So first, the life cycle. Please take a look at the life cycle of MySpace in terms of numbers. So MySpace is a social networking site that was once quite popular, had a lifespan that was characterized by an amazing increase in popularity, followed by a steep fall in that popularity. MySpace was first introduced to the public in 2003 and has since achieved phenomenal success, becoming the very distinguished medium for social interaction, the distribution of musical works, and personal expression. It has millions of users and a very active community to support it. MySpace's popularity, on the other hand, started to decline after the introduction of Facebook and a number of other social media sites. MySpace has struggled to remain relevant and keep its user base as a result of users moving to the other platforms that are more recent and user-friendly. In the end, the platform had a significant drop in the numbers of active users, which ultimately led to its decline and loss of significance in the social media scene. Next slide, please. Here I'm going to talk why it failed and why the leadership missed the sign and their role on that failure. Despite the numerous indicators that MySpace has on the decline, the company leadership appeared to ignore all the flags. First, the rise of Facebook to the position of dominating player in the social media arena should have been a wake-up call for the leadership of MySpace, promoting them to reevaluate their strategy and solve the platform's deficiencies as soon as possible. The leadership of MySpace, on the other hand, looked to be complacent and failed to effectively innovate or adapt, despite the fact that the environment was constantly changing and user tastes were constantly developing. The inability to plan ahead and recognize the shifting dynamics within the social media business was a contributing factor that led to the eventual platform failure. On the other hand, it's impossible to overstate the importance of executive team at MySpace in the company's final failure. MySpace was formerly considered one of the most influential social media platforms. However, the company leadership failed to realize the need of providing positive user experience, maintaining mobile compatibility, and the requirement for ongoing innovation. Instead of investing in necessary upgrades and enhancement, they concentrated on revenue through advertising, which repelled people and detracted them from overall user experience provided by the platform. In addition, MySpace's capacity to successfully compete was further harmed by the bad decision making, one of which was the company's unfortunate acquisition by News Corporation. However, in the end, the failure of MySpace leadership to have a strategic vision to its inability to adjust to changing conditions and their incapacity to meet essential user requirements were important contributors to the failure of the platform. And now I'm going to hand it off to Matt. Matt?
So I'm going to be talking about what areas of leadership MySpace was lacking in. So MySpace, when they were acquired by the News Corp Media, they really had a you follow the guidelines we put in place, and this is what we're going to do. At the beginning of the year, if they set out their goals for the year, if their goals, if something came up midway through the year and it wasn't part of their guideline, there wasn't a lot of wiggle room. So MySpace was definitely lacking in white space management, where you don't have the flexibility or the agility to be innovative and work with stuff on the fly. So one area that Facebook excelled in, that MySpace really fell behind in, was Facebook was able to adapt to what the market wanted. So in MySpace, they didn't have that. They didn't have that agility to be able to do that. Facebook, as their time went on, they for a couple of years they saw, for example, Farmville was super popular, and Facebook really targeted that because they saw the market was hot in that area, so they went for it. Even though it might not have been in their, their 1-year plan, 5-year plan to, attack the games area of Facebook, they saw that it was an opening and they went for it. And that was a big downfall for MySpace. They weren't able to do that. They weren't able to keep up with the enhancements and the updates in technology. And that was really a big downfall for MySpace. We can go to the next slide. For the stakeholder buy-in. So MySpace did something at the beginning, did really well in attracting top talents to promote their brand, whether it was music artists, actors, athletes, whatever it might have been. They were able to use that to promote their platforms. So in that aspect, they did really well in getting the buy-in from consumers, because they saw that, we have all these celebrities using our platforms, so we're going to use it. They struggled, though, getting their management buy-in. So when you had News Corp Media take over in 2005, I believe, we saw in a few slides back, but when they took over, they had a hard time getting management buy-in due to their flexibility. They had no flexibility with their vision, and the waterfall approach was kind of their crutch, where when we go back to the flexibility aspect of it, in project management, there is, you have agile and you have waterfall. Waterfall approaches, when you start something, you can't start the next item until you finish that item you started. Where in agile, you can start multiple different items on the go. And if something comes up that you feel like it's super important, you can add it in. Where in waterfall, you can't. And that was a big area that MySpace kind of, even though agile became a few years later, it would have been something that they really struggled in that aspect, that they weren't flexible. They didn't have the ability to work on a few things on the fly. One of the areas that they struggled in was obviously the technology. They couldn't keep up with Facebook. And if you look at like their UI and UX components to their site, there were areas that they talked about that they could have enhanced and they knew they need to enhance, but they didn't want to spend the money or the time to work on it because they had other items on their to-do list that they want to finish first. So when you look at stuff like that, it was hard for management to really buy into the vision when there was items that they knew they need to work on, but they didn't have the flexibility to do it. We can go to the next slide. So where did MySpace fail to change and adapt? We kind of covered it a little bit, but the leadership and the product development. So when we look at the leadership aspect, the lack of flexibility in their vision, obviously we talked about that. There was no flexibility in their vision. And when stuff came up, they weren't able to adapt and work on the fly. And they could not keep up with their competition. Obviously, when Facebook came into the market, they just took off right away. And they were able to work with the market, and they went with the trends in the market, and they were able to attack that, and really is what set them apart. Product development, they couldn't make significant changes like we talked about with their UI and UX changes, and being a website. That's one of the most important aspects of a site. When your business is all online, if you don't have a good UI and UX component to your site, it's not user-friendly, and the user experience isn't going to be great. And Facebook knew that, and they were constantly changing. Even today, you go on Facebook, there's a new update, and they're constantly changing it. Where MySpace, they built their site, and that was kind of it. That was their base, and they didn't make a lot of changes to it, which was a big crutch for them because they weren't able to get past that. And their development cycle was too slow to keep up with the competition. like we talked about, they knew they had major UI and UX changes they need to make, but they were stuck developing and working on other aspects, and they weren't able to keep up with those changes, which obviously Facebook, they were very quick when it came to that. They were able to adapt and work on the fly, and able to make the changes they needed to, which is which really helped Facebook go above and beyond and surpass MySpace in such a short time. I'll hand it off to Meg.
Thank you. So to summarize some of the internal and external factors for this failure, I mean, I think that the number one thing that we've heard from Ahmad and Matthew is just that the critical reason they failed was because they just didn't change. They really, they initially in the company had a big focus on e-commerce, and a lot of the complaints of the site were that people were bombarded by ads all the time because this was one of the money-making streams, and management, in particularly News Corp, was very focused on that. The inflexibility or lack of agility to respond to changing market factors was a huge internal issue. At one point, they tried to acquire Facebook, and they did not. They were not successful in that endeavor. They had a lack of investment in proper IT expertise, as we've been speaking about. That user experience just was not sharp enough, flexible enough. For example, there were a lot of pre-configured interest channels, but little flexibility to create your own experience or connect with people on a topic of your own choosing. So it wasn't very personalizable as an experience. Lack of employee engagement was one. So there's things that we read when doing our research that people kind of saw the demise of the company coming. And unfortunately, they did gain a poor reputation due to employee misuse of the site. And so some employees used the site for their own personal gain, which was part of the demise of MySpace. And so a lack of innovation and a changing market, those were all internal factors. And on the external side, this all was happening during this rapid change in not only the internet, but technology in general. Very, very agile competitors and young and savvy users who migrated to other platforms when they were able to see that they were so much better. To take a moment just to compare this to the change process from our text, this is figure 8.1, activities contributing to effective change management on page 164. And it was a bit challenging to compare MySpace, given what we've learned, to effective change management, because the major part of their demise was that they didn't change enough. And so if you look at these 5 different factors, which are probably familiar to you, the failure to motivate change was present. They were stuck sort of in their old story, their old vision, and weren't very agile for change in the first place. Also, their vision, they were sort of stuck in an old vision, but also there was some confusion by the users around, was this social media? Is this a social entertainment destination? And I think some of that confusion still exists today. Developing political support, like we said, they had a lack of employee engagement, unfortunately, and little consultation, and also not much response to the complaints or the feedback of their users. And so as for managing the transition and sustaining momentum, well, because they weren't changing a lot, there isn't much to say about that. That's sort of an irrelevant thing to talk about in this case. So lessons learned from what we've read about MySpace and its fall from grace. The first one is definitely that companies have to be agile and they have to embrace ongoing change, especially in the technology sector. And this is so important that businesses really see themselves as something that will change on an ongoing cycle, not just something, every 5 years or when the leadership team decides it's time for change. The second one was, it can't be underestimated how important the user experience is, whether that be a product or in this case, a website. If the users aren't happy, then they're going to migrate to better options fairly quickly when they arise. The importance of employee and stakeholder engagement. Here we saw a very top-down leadership style with less flexibility and less responsiveness. And one wonders if some of the issues they had with their team might have not happened had their team been more altruistic to the company, which can be fed by engagement at that level. And then, of course, the big thing being, strong leadership and a leadership team who has a good vision, but is willing to change that vision and implement change strategies with agility. So to finish our presentation, here's just a little update on where is MySpace today. There is an article from just a couple months ago that reports on some statistics that in 2006, the site was receiving approximately 29 billion monthly visits. And in 2022, this number was 6.9 million. So they are having a fraction of the number of visits, even though they've sort of rebranded themselves. They now call themselves still MySpace, but the S is a small s instead of a big S. And they continue to exist as a social media platform, but with an entertainment kind of presence. Other stats, in 2006, they had 90 million registered users, and this year they have 6 million. And so we can definitely see that the future of MySpace is fairly unclear at this time. And we know that they sorely missed an opportunity at a time when the space was really growing. No pun intended there. So finally, we'll just pause on this slide here, just in case you'd like to access our references. This QR code will bring you to a Google Doc where you can find those. And we just want to thank you for taking the time to watch our presentation, and we look forward to listening to yours as well.